I'm not getting these jobs, it must be something to do with me. And it's like, well, actually, no, it's just a recruitment process that it's kind of stacked against the way that you behave and the way that you think. So if those processes don't change, I think people just need to have that level of self-awareness to say, do you know what? I'm not actually at my best in this kind of format. So I need to really think about it. Maybe I need to do more preparation. Maybe I need to be upfront about various things that I might not be upfront about. I'm sorry, I don't perform very well in these types of conversations, whatever that is. So I think it's having that kind of level of self-awareness and realization that it's not the kind of process that you're going to thrive in. So you need to take steps to deal with that. And if you don't get the job, it wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because the process didn't uncover, your zone of genius, as it were.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations. And we have someone incredibly special here today with us, Matt. Matt Alder, would you like to wave hello? Thank you. Matt is a strategic consultant focusing on innovation and technology in the HR and talent acquisition spaces. He's the host of Recruiting Future, one of the world's popular talent acquisition podcasts that we were very lucky to be on with him just a few months back. He said 20 years where he has built a reputation as a global thought leader, working with employers to optimize their talent technology strategies, and is the author of 2 books. About 7 years ago now, he published Exceptional Talent, How to Attract, Acquire, and Retain the Very Best Employees. And just recently in 2022, Digital Talent, Find, Recruit, and Retain the People Your Business Needs to in a world of digital transformation, very near and dear to our heart in both topics. He has also delivered keynote speeches at industry events in 17 countries. I loved that number. Matt, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. It's always good to be on someone else's podcast.
Right? It's got to be a little weird.
Ask the questions.
That's true. You can. We'll answer even here. We promise.
Fair enough.
So we had the opportunity to connect with you on your podcast, and you did out yourself as a catalyst when we were talking to you, which gave me a huge grin. And so we'd love to give you the opportunity here to share your lens of your career with that catalytic gaze. So would love to hear kind of when you think about your past, what are the moments that you feel incredibly proud of in the drive for change or have had the most impact?
Yeah, it's funny. It's when I kind of look back at the jobs that I've had and what I do now, there's kind of been this overarching theme, which has kind of kept me doing what I do now and kept me in the industry that I'm in, which is fundamentally I want to fix recruiting. So it's kind of a driver for me, and I've worked for a couple of organizations where I was introducing different types of recruitment marketing, and really, we were trying to be cutting edge. We were trying to do things differently. We were thinking about how, the internet changes the dynamics around how companies market themselves as employers, how people apply, all those kind of things. So I had a great, time at a couple of companies for a 10-year period doing that. But I think that I kind of finally realized that. I needed to do something bigger to kind of do this. And really, my podcast has been running for 10 years now. And it's really been in this last 10 years of my career with everything that I've been doing around the podcast and writing and all that kind of stuff that I feel I'm really making a difference, because really my podcast is about finding, the people in the industry who are driving change, finding ideas from outside our industry about how we can drive change, and kind of just bringing them together on a platform that people can, that I can share with people, where people can listen to these episodes and learn things or be inspired and all that kind of stuff. And it, over a 10-year period, I know, because I get feedback from people, that it has had a real impact. And in fact, a couple of people have said to me recently that they their career grew up with my podcast, which is just amazing to hear. So it's kind of been that overarching kind of frustration with everything to do with the industry that I work in. And I like to feel now that I'm genuinely kind of making a difference and trying to set the agenda and just giving people the information and the inspiration they need to to drive change, because I was never going to be able to do that by myself working for a single employer.
I love that. Taking us back to that moment, what was that like to have this, hey, I've been here for 10 years. Yes, I've had impact, but I think it's bigger. Like giving that job up isn't always an easy decision.
Yeah, for me it was kind of a slow fade. I started writing a blog about 15 or 16 years ago when I still had a job. I've still got a
Right.
job now, but a proper job. And it was interesting. I kind of had a bit of a lucky break because um, I was writing this very opinionated blog about recruiting, and I obviously was employed by someone who might not necessarily share my views. And there were a number of people in the organization who I never asked permission, obviously, and there were a number of kind of people in the organization who sort of flagged it up to the. I was working for the CEO, flagged it up to the CEO and said, I don't think that he should be writing this blog, and where's the clearance for this and all this sort of thing. And he was either very understanding or didn't know what a blog was. I can't quite work out which one it was. I'm going to go with very understanding, and just let me get on with it. So I was able to, test out this kind of thing, have an opinion, write all that kind of stuff in an environment where that probably normally wouldn't be possible. So the podcast, the blog became a podcast over time, and it sort of went from there. So it was kind of a bit of a slow fade, soft landing, rather than I'm giving up my job now and I'm going to go do this instead. It kind of just merged into one. But I think I suppose the turning point was making that decision to start a blog without asking for any kind of any kind of permission or anything like that. Just just going out there and doing it.
I love this story. I think certainly in my early days, I love biographies, and I was so drawn in my youth to, you think about someone like Gandhi, and you're like, I can never be a Gandhi. I mean, I'm not pretending that Gandhi, I don't mean it like that. But you read the story and you see how a life that is amazing and we hold up on a pedestal happens one step at a time. Right. And so you are making such a huge difference in the work you do. Like you said, giving information and inspiration, but it's not like, okay, today's the day that I am the chief inspirer in the talent acquisition space. So I love this of like, be bold, speak your truth. Don't ask permission. You have the ideas and the things that you're called to do. So start somewhere, and you don't know where it's going to go. And then it's following that energy and going one step at a time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that also, having that kind of driving force about what I'm trying to do,
Yeah,
um,
that purpose.
is how I'm able to do so many podcasts. Because, I do two podcasts a week. I've done that for 10 years. And people are always asking me how I do it. And I'm not quite sure. I don't really know. I just do it. It's
You just
just
do
a
it.
thing. It's just like, well, this week I'm publishing two podcasts, and it's not even conscious. It's just what I do. And
Mhm.
hopefully we'll continue to be so until maybe something more effective comes along. I don't know what
Right.
the future holds, but it's just that, yeah, it's just what I do. I think that's the thing.
And it's just what you do. So tell us how you relate to this concept of catalyst, right? What does that mean in your life when you say, it's just what I do?
Yeah, I think I love the concept. I love this whole idea of what do you call it? A friendly troublemaker or positive
Yeah.
troublemaker. What was the
Yeah.
phrase?
A positive
Positive
troublemaker.
A positive
troublemaker.
troublemaker. Yeah. Because I've always that's how I've always kind of seen myself in in the kind of things that I do. And I just love the concept, and it really is about driving change. I think that people we get so locked in as humans into how we think things are supposed to work, and there's always a level of questions that are never asked. And I think we see that with recruitment all the time. going through a recruitment process and being hired for a job is a universal experience. Everyone who's had a job has had that experience. And there are cultural norms about that experience that people never question. Why do I have to have a resume? Why is it called a resume? Is that not a French word? Why is it called a CV in the UK? That's Latin. Why do we have to have this ridiculous interview where I turn up, I send someone my CV, then I go to an interview and they ask me questions about something I've already sent them and I don't question it. And I'm being very flippant about recruitment. Obviously, processes are a lot better than that. But it's just people who ask those questions about why do we do this? And I think it's just really, really important. I think it becomes even more important as the world gets more chaotic and more disruptive and is moving at a much faster pace. Just really trying to understand why things are the way they are it's just so important because very often they're the way they are for some reason that has not been valid for 50 years. And you can look at work like this as well. I did a presentation about a year ago about norms around work and things like the 5-day week or the 9 to 5, all these kind of things. They're all concepts that were invented by someone for a very specific reason that's now out of date. But whenever you kind of put it out there to the world, actually, do you know what? Maybe people should work 4 days a week. The debate and the explosion of opinion and everything that kind of erupts around that because you're disrupting something that can't be disrupted. It's kind of illogical, but it just happens. So that's why the world needs people who ask those kind of questions, I think, and that to me is a big part of what a catalyst is.
It's such a great example because it really brings to life the things that we take for granted and the fact that like the little like head tilt as you look at the problem again differently and you're like, why are we doing it that way? It's such a powerful question that catalysts bring to the world. I want to
exactly. I just thought of another example. So I live in Scotland, and Scotland is obviously various school holidays, long weekends, and all those kind of things. And I used to live in England, and they're very different. So they're different times of year, different things going on. So because of that, I've been much more kind of conscious about asking questions. And it was like, why is this weekend a holiday? And it turned out it was because 100 years ago, the kids had to help bring the potato harvest in, which is this week. That's why it's a holiday. And you're like, okay. And the world is full of things like that may or may not still be useful.
the power of ending up, even if unintentionally, in different cultural context. And that can be everything from you're moving from one large tech company to another large tech company, or you're moving around the world. But like what that can do for our perspective and just sort of like paying
100%.
attention to those questions that your brain's actually, why are we doing it that way?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'd love to pivot to, you wrote 2 amazing books about, attracting and retaining the very best employees, more recently, as Tracy mentioned, on focusing on supporting digital transformation, which also everyone is going through. I'd love to talk to you about how your books relate to the concept of catalyst, and maybe starting off with sharing your thoughts on how you feel catalysts could and should play in today's organization.
Yeah, I think that both books kind of touch on this. I mean, we don't necessarily use that term, and again, it's because of the speed of the speed of change. And the first book we looked at what is exceptional talent, and exceptional talent was people who could really bring value to an organization, and that's not necessarily people who are catalysts, but obviously catalysts are a big part of that. And in the second book we really talked about flexibility of thinking when it came to digital talent. So it's kind of like what is everyone wants digital talent in their organization because everyone is going through a transformation, and there's just not enough people with the skill sets that you're looking for around. So how do you what can you do? And it's like kind of like, what can you do to attract those people away from the competition? What can you do to grow those skills within your business? Or what is it that's kind of limiting the way that you think about recruitment. It's kind of like you're thinking, I can only employ people who've worked at these tech companies or been to this university or whatever, and you're massively shrinking your kind of pool of talent because you're doing that. And it also, I think, and this is a kind of a really important point, that most traditional recruitment processes are stacked against people who are catalysts, for lots of different reasons. So it means that actually organizations can be filtering out the people who could make the most difference to their organization. And I think we talked about this on my podcast. Perhaps the most obvious one is we're talking about people who probably move jobs quite often because they get bored, they're looking for a new challenge. And there's a little bit in the kind of subconscious operating manual of recruiting that says that's a bad thing. You've been job hopping. That must mean you're not committed. All that kind of stuff. So there are things that either consciously or subconsciously or systematically actually filter out people who could be make a massive difference to those organizations.
It's such an important point, and I would love for you to talk about both perspectives there. So what is your advice for the talent recruitment people about how to think about that? But given that that's the reality, what's your advice for catalysts about how to navigate that?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, starting with the kind of employers, I think that we're at a great time with this at the moment anyway, because people are looking very carefully at their recruiting process for things like bias, inclusion. Technology is changing things. So more so than any time that I can remember, this is something that's very much on the agenda. How are we getting the talent that we need? And actually the way that we've been doing this in the past isn't necessarily the right way. Now there's a huge amount of progress that still needs to be made, but at least those conversations are happening. And a lot of it is like looking at what are your traditional filters, also what are your traditional recruitment processes. A real eye-opener for me that I hadn't actually realized, that came up in a podcast conversation with someone else on my podcast, was in my entire career I never got a job through a traditional recruitment process. Either I was a runner up and I got the job because someone dropped out. That was the first time. Or I knew someone at the organization who vouched for me, or there was kind of some crazy assessment day that didn't operate under normal kind of circumstances. And at no point did I actually get a job where it was straight up, here's my CV, I'm doing an interview, I'm doing a second interview, all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of a real revelation actually when I thought about it, because it hadn't really occurred to me, because I've had all these jobs and that kind of stuff. So I suppose from a catalyst perspective, it is having that level of self-awareness, because I don't think people necessarily realize that it's happening. And I think that there's a risk sometimes of thinking, I'm not getting these jobs, it must be excuse me, I'm not getting these jobs, it must be something to do with me. And it's like, well, actually, no, it's just a recruitment process that it's kind of stacked against the way that you behave and the way that you think. So if those processes don't change, I think people just need to have that level of self-awareness to say, do you know what? I'm not actually at my best in this kind of format. So I need to really think about it. Maybe I need to do more preparation. Maybe I need to be upfront about various things that I might not be upfront about. I'm sorry, I don't perform very well in these types of conversations, or, whatever that is. So I think it's having that kind of level of self-awareness and realization that it's not the kind of process that you're going to thrive in. So you need to take steps to deal with that. And if you don't get the job, it wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because the process didn't uncover, your zone of genius, as it were.
Thanks. The corollary to just in general, the feedback that we can get as catalysts, you don't fit the mold. You're always on the outside. You're too loud. You're too disruptive. You're too this. I think like having that moment where you can just reflect and be like, this is a process that doesn't fit me. And this is neither inherently good nor inherently bad in either direction.
Exactly.
But I do want to push you on, because it is so challenging. You nailed it, right? It's like we are starters. And it's hard to take credit for the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that you might have generated because you left before the upswing took, but it never would have started without you. Like all of those things that catalysts do that are really hard to talk about. So I'm wondering if you have just maybe a little bit more concrete advice for catalysts in terms of, okay, if the traditional processes, which are still dominant, aren't working for me, what might I do?
Yeah, I was wincing when you said that because that happened to me once. I worked at a company and then I kind of left, and then I don't know, about 6 or 7 years later, I kind of had a meeting with the guy who was the CEO, and they'd sold the company for lots of money, and he actually said, "Thank you very much for starting this process." And I was like, "Great, I absolutely got no upside from it
Right?
whatsoever." But I'm glad that you recognize. I'm glad that you recognize that. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one because I think every case is different, but I think having that sense of, this is how I drive change, this is how my style has created, created something, this is something tangible that I can show you. And I think again, it's that kind of self-awareness, because I don't think we always think about what was our true impact sometimes. So I think it's maybe kind of really reflecting on what impact you've actually had, that you can talk about and really relate back to the style of working that you have. I think it kind of has to be, if it's a traditional recruitment process, it's the quality of those examples that you bring. And I think sometimes there is a temptation that I don't want to quantify this in data because it's not finished yet, or it's still going on, or it's not as good as it could be. And I just think it's kind of like, what is it? How can I evidence that this happened, or this continued to happen, in a way that just sounds authentic and not like I'm kind of making it up and trying to claim credit for something that was nothing to do with me. But it is really, really tough. I think that's there's no kind of getting away. There's no kind of getting away from that. But
That's
again,
right.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to. Yeah, I think it's like that, just that kind of self-awareness, and um, also perhaps a sense of being uncomfortable sometimes about talking about things in this particular way, particularly if you think it's something that, do you know what, I could have been so much better, or it's not finished yet. I don't really want to, I don't want to bring it up because other people wouldn't see it like that.
Yeah, and it's endemic in the catalyst, not to say that no catalysts have egos, but because we can always see how things could have been better, it's really hard for a lot of this community to really own that this thing exists even because you were there. And then another thing that I've often witnessed is the need to say we, because catalysts very seldomly create the thing on their own. And in an interview process, that can be seen as kind of wishy-washy. And so I think also just leaning into, it wasn't perfect. And I can say I did that because it wouldn't have existed. I'm not claiming I did it by myself. There's
No,
a
I think I
gentleman.
think I think that's a great point. I feel incredibly uncomfortable still talking about my career in this way, because I've just worked with some brilliant people, and there are things that I achieved that I couldn't have done without those people. And I think it's kind of almost unnatural sometimes to talk about yourself in in isolation, but everyone else does it. So,
Everyone else does it.
so that's the thing that
Totally.
you need to think about. Yeah.
Totally. And I mean, really, it could be assigned to the recruiters or the interviewers about this person has a situational awareness and a team bias and a like collaboration out of the gate. But that's not often how it's landing on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman in our community who came to one of our first classes when we moved online, and like pretty much immediately after he went through the class, he was already a VP of innovation, and he said, I will forevermore know how to articulate my value now that I know that I'm a catalyst and I can contextualize it. And I bring
Absolutely.
this up because in the world of recruiting and talent management and all of that stuff, fit is something that people talk a lot about. It's crucial for everybody. But you were hinting at this earlier, which is like, if you didn't get the job, it probably wasn't the right job anyway, as you're being honest about who you are and how you're showing up. I'm wondering if you have any advice for catalysts, how to double click on that, because as I've gone through my own journey, I was like, if I had just asked even harder questions, like if I'm successful and I'm starting to cannibalize the revenue of some of the other lines of business, how are you going to react? Right? Like, what is your actual appetite for change? So do you have any advice for catalysts about how to find great fit?
Yeah, I suppose it's two parts to this. I think starting with the concept of fit. Again, this is something that I'm really seeing employers kind of really pick apart, and it's just like, what do we mean by that? And very often it can be like, how good was their handshake? What are they wearing? Did they look me in the eye? And it's kind of like, hang on a minute, that's just not kind of it's not kind of relevant. So there's a lot of either unconscious or conscious, even worse, conscious bias around that aspect of it. So I think that's one part of it. But I think, yeah, it is. I think a lot of it is about asking those types of questions, because I think you can go into a job and you think, oh, do you know, I can do some brilliant things for this company. It's fantastic. And I certainly had a job like this myself, where I was really excited about it, and actually it was just a bit of a disaster, because, as you say, the way that other people reacted to what I was trying to do was something that I didn't check out or anticipate or think about in the culture of that business before I joined it. And it was a great business and it had brilliant people in it, but it was not the right place for me to work. And I just didn't even think about that. And I think if I'd asked, it was a cool company. I was just desperate to work there. I was quite young. But I think if I'd asked questions about, well, actually, why don't you do this way? And it's like, what are the reasons behind, I'm looking at things that I can fix, but I'm not actually asking why they do those things those way. And there were some, I would argue, potentially not very good reasons, but the belief was that we did it for these very good reasons. And jumping in and trying to disrupt that was not a good thing. And it's something that I think asking the right type of questions when they were interviewing me would have really helped to uncover. So I think it's an interview is a two-way process. I think you have to remember that, and you have to you kind of have to try. You have to kind of say, okay, these are the kind of things that I might be doing. How do you feel about that? And I think that's that's kind of really important.
I think the two-way process is a really good reminder, especially when you're like really looking for a job. It can be easy to just lean into, please like me, please hire me. But if it's not going to work, or you're going to be miserable or whatever, it's really not.
Yeah, and if you're having to look for a job again 3 months later, having had to being forced to leave, you're kind of in a worse position. So, I just think it's kind of really important. But also, I think it sets the tone for when you arrive as well. It's kind of like, okay, we're recruiting this person, and they're pretty, they're pretty out there with their questions, but hey, we're going to make that decision because that's what we want. And it kind of primes it when, for when you arrive. I think that's, because they could be deciding between two candidates. Like, we've got this candidate here who is going to be brilliant, very much in the status quo, very similar to the person who did the job before, or we've got this person who's going to turn it on his head. And you would hope, it doesn't always happen, but you would hope that the employer would decide that they were going to take that person and support them to do that. But that's a whole nother.
Yeah, that's a whole nother
Story.
conversation.
But at least there's a fighting chance that it might happen, I think.
That's right. And I love how you shared the, like, identify yourself and this is how I create change. Like, don't be shy about the fact that this is the value that you bring, or else that definitely leads to lack of fit.
Yeah. 100%.
I have loved the advice for catalysts, and now I'd love to flip it to the other side. So your first book explores, finding and retaining the best employees. We argue catalysts aren't the only best employee, but they are really critical, high impact employees as the pace of change is increasing, which you mentioned. And so would love to open up our discussion of how can leaders and organizations find these folks, bring them in, and retain them.
Yeah, I think it's something that companies have just been really, really bad at. Even finding the people who are like that within their own business is kind of a challenge. And I think it just kind of goes back to, I think one of the challenges for HR departments and recruiting departments at the moment is they tend to be very misaligned with the goals of the business and the strategic objectives of the business. In fact, on the podcast last week, I was talking to someone who'd done some research that said 18% of those people, 18% of the HR, only 18% of the HR departments they've spoken to were actually fully aligned with the corporate strategy and corporate objectives, which is
that
is amazing.
Mind blowing.
I know. So And I think part of that is actually really thinking about what skills do we need to do these jobs, and is this job even the right job? It's just kind of like, what do we, if the company's going in this direction, what do we need to do that? And actually we need to really dig down into the skills that we need to do that, and not just the kind of the technical skills or the hard skills, like the soft skills, the type of person, the attributes, the all those kind of things. And I think that employers have to do that and make that move, because that's the only way they're going to be fully aligned with the direction and objectives of their business. Because you kind of, businesses are moving very quickly, they're being very disruptive, and you kind of have to disrupt the roles and the structure and everything to do that. So I think it's actually kind of quite a key strategic point, because once you do that and you start thinking about skills that you need, rather than we need someone with this kind of background to fill this role, that's when you can really get to these type of people, when you're looking at attributes like, things like learning agility, or whatever. I mean, there's a whole list of them, and I'm sure you've got many of these that catalysts have. So when you're looking at those kind of things, and you need that to make change, then that's how you can do it. So it's as simple and as complicated and difficult as that. But I think it's really about just looking at recruitment in a very different way, because you're not going to get this on a kind of a very role-based way of thinking about it. And it's essential as well, because roles and skills are going out of date so quickly. So you can employ someone who's a fantastic developer in a certain programming language, but in 6 months' time, that language is defunct. And it's, are they able to learn a new one, or offer something different? So there's a real kind of, there's a kind of real revolution going on at the moment. I think this is a key part of that.
It's interesting because I don't know the talent acquisition world and the talent recruitment world, but I mean, one of the things you're hitting on is there's a very strong chance there's a bunch of catalysts already in your organization that aren't being tapped, that might actually be negatively disruptive right now, because they haven't gotten sort of the self-awareness, the I'm a catalyst, I think differently, the training to bring people along. That's how we help organizations, is to start with the people who are inside, because you might have the culture fit and all of that stuff. What's your, advice to organizations writ large, sort of with that lens?
Yeah, it's to not judge people on the role that they have, which I think happens all the time. It's like, well, they work in this department and they do this thing, therefore they can't possibly do this other thing. And the weird thing is when people arrive at companies and they've been through a recruitment process, you have all this information about them and what they've done in the past and their achievements and all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of gets sucked into the machine and lost. And then people just get viewed in the light of the job they do right now. So again, it's just really important internally to understand the skill set of the people that you have, and that's not defined by the role that they do. And I've just seen this time and time again, where people with amazing potential can't move departments because no one's ever moved from that job to this job, therefore you can't do it. Or you've got people who kind of like maybe taking a step back in terms of their skills for various reasons and have so much more to give the company, but then it's kind of like, no, they're at this level and they do this kind of thing, so therefore they can't possibly do this. And I think it's that flexibility of thinking, that understanding of the skills that people have, their ability to develop new skills, and not judging that by what department they work in or who their manager is, or what job they've had, I think is again a key part of it. And I think the good thing about these are all massive changes and big things, but the good thing is they're conversations and changes that are happening in lots of organizations right now, although maybe slower than we'd like, but at least that narrative is there and that understanding is starting to develop.
I want to respond to two things that you said there. It's so true. So we ran a catalyst program last year, and this woman got picked as being a catalyst and curated into the cohort, and the leadership was like, that person's a catalyst? And then they stopped and they thought about it, and they were like, oh, she has written 2 books. She does run a nonprofit outside of work. Like, she had just pulled herself back in and used her catalytic things everywhere. So I think you're totally spot on. And the other thing I just want to like double click on for the audience is when we do these catalyst programs and they're like, here's an objective, we need to activate our new strategy. And they're like, well, we need people from the strategy team to do those things. We need that level of expertise or something. And you're like, actually, Catalyst will find the knowledge and expertise that they need to get it done. And what you don't want to lose, I'm not saying don't have any strategy people in the cohort, but what you don't want to lose is all of that multidimensional outside thinking that you could bring in across the organization. So thank you for making it
I
real
think
for us.
one of the things that resonated with me that you said earlier was, you know, when you move from one company to another, you ask those questions. Why did you do it like this? You know, what's going on? You know, and I think that's the key thing that you can lose if you just put that into the existing structure that just comes up with the things that it's always come up with. It's just like, you know, just because someone doesn't have 20 years experience in this area, they could just ask all the right questions that make the difference, because
It might be a good thing, in fact, that they're not coming with the history of we failed
Exactly.
5 times. Yeah.
Exactly that. We failed 5 times, or we've always done this way. We're not quite sure why. The knowledge left left the business about 10 years ago, but we've always done it like this. And so yeah, I think that's just it's just such a great point about that kind of almost that beginner's mindset that you're just like,
Yeah.
what's this? Why does this work? Why do we need to do this? And I think it's
Yeah.
just a kind of a really important thing. And you can't do it if you've been doing that thing for 10 years, however much you think. You can't get that kind of external perspective.
Amazing. We could talk to you for hours once again. But as we wrap up today, I would love to move to the fun question. We'd love to hear about your favorite catalyst, past or present, who inspires you, and why do they stand out to you?
My favorite catalyst is someone who's actually been on my podcast a few years ago, and is actually becoming ever more famous. He's tapped into this audience of younger people on TikTok. Is a guy called Rory Sutherland. I don't know if you come across him. He's kind of he's a behavioral. He works for an advertising agency, and he's a behavioral scientist. And he looks at behavioral science and how that works with, you know, with sales and marketing and all this kind of stuff. And he is the epitome of someone who asks those kind of questions. Why do we do this way? What if we did this? What would happen? So his content is everywhere. He's all over YouTube. As I say, he must be in his late 60s, perhaps 70s, and he's suddenly kind of gone crazy on TikTok. So
That wasn't where I thought that was going, Matt.
Yeah, which illustrates you know, the benefits of thinking like this. So yeah, he's a great guy and just a great source of thinking differently about things.
Amazing. Well, I think we have a bunch of things we need to put in the show notes. Certainly a link to that podcast, which will direct everyone to your amazing podcast. We'll put links to your books. Anything else you want us to highlight?
No, that's fine. I think you know, if people want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Or yeah, just check out the podcast.
Definitely check out his podcast. Well, thank you for joining us, Matt. It was delightful. And to our listening audience, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com.
And because we know you enjoyed this episode as much as we loved getting to talk to Matt and recording it, please take a few seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. And for all the other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.
Thanks again.